She was shaking. Lying on the cold concrete floor, soaked from the leak in the shattered greenhouse roof. Her dress clung to her like a second skin, torn, stained, and clinging to her as if even fabric couldn't let go. 3 newborns lay beside her, their cries faint but alive, tiny fists curled like petals, pink mouths open to a world that hadn't welcomed them. No one was coming. Not the aunt who locked the door, not the church that once called her a blessing, not the man who swore he'd return. Just her, and 3 lives that had no business surviving the night. Now tell me, have you ever been left behind by the very people who were supposed to protect you? Judged, discarded, ignored, not because of who you are, but because of what they chose to believe. Before we go any deeper, if stories like this one stir your heart, please subscribe right now, and tell me in the comments, have you ever been abandoned when all you needed was love? Because today, you're going to hear a story that just might feel like your own. She tried to hold on, to the sound of her babies breathing, to the warmth of the smallest one pressed against her chest, but her eyelids were heavy, her body torn, her soul drifting, and in that hazy space between pain and nothing, she heard a guitar, his voice, soft, cracked, trembling. "I don't want to be anywhere else," he had whispered. She remembered the orchard, the stars above them, the way Cairo's hands trembled when he touched her, not out of fear, but reverence. They weren't careless, there were no promises, no plans. Just breathless moments pressed into each other like wildflowers between pages. He traced her collarbone like it was scripture. She kissed the scar on his jaw like it belonged to her. They moved like they knew this wasn't forever, but it was still worth everything. Even now, bleeding and half-conscious, she could feel his thumb brushing her lip. He left before dawn, but his memory stayed. And now, with 3 new souls curled beside her, Serafina didn't ask for rescue. She only whispered to the wind, "Let them live." The world was quiet again. Morning crept in slow, not gentle, just unapologetic, the kind of silence that makes guilt louder. And in the stillness, a sound slipped through the cracks. Not thunder, not screaming, crying, small, steady, alive. A boy on his way to school stopped near the old greenhouse. He wasn't supposed to be there, but something pulled him close, maybe curiosity, maybe fate. He peeked inside, expecting emptiness. Instead, he froze. A woman, half naked and pale, lay still on the floor. 3 tiny infants curled beside her like fragile blossoms, one still clutching her finger, blood on the floor, blanket soaked, eyes closed. He didn't scream. He ran. 10 minutes later, the town that had once closed its doors on Serafina stood in the mud, mouths open. No one spoke, no one moved. Because when judgment stares back at you in the form of 3 living, breathing miracles, you don't gossip, you listen. And as the cries of her children echoed off the broken windows, Willowbrook saw something they hadn't seen in years, truth, not dressed up, not delivered in a sermon, but raw, and wrapped in the arms of a woman they left to die. Willowbrook was a town of front porch smiles and freshly swept steps. People waved from their driveways. They brought casseroles when someone passed, and hung paper stars on the town square every December. It looked like a place that cared, but care is not the same as compassion. Serafina Clay never really belonged, not because anyone said it, but because they never had to. She was the girl who painted robins and wrens on smooth stones and hid them around the park for children to find. She tied yellow ribbons on branches near the cemetery for strangers who lost someone. She sang lullabies at the clinic to calm babies getting vaccinated, even though none were hers. She did these things quietly, never posted about them, never asked to be thanked. She lived in a little rental house with peeling paint and ivy growing around the porch posts. She wore thrifted cardigans and read poetry to herself beneath the old oak behind the school. Sometimes you'd see her barefoot in the field, sketching something in a notebook, a leaf, a feather, the curve of a cloud. She loved things that no one else noticed, and that somehow made her strange, not dangerous, not unkind, just out of step. And in a place like Willowbrook, being different was enough to be watched. They didn't dislike her, they just didn't see her, or rather, they didn't want to. "She's lovely, just odd," muttered parents when her name came up at PTA. No one ever said anything directly to her face, but doors were rarely held open. Invitations to town gatherings always seemed to get lost. The school board decided her art classes were non-essential after budget cuts, even though she taught the children how to see wonder in weeds and stars. She smiled through it, always, Even when the children's birthdays passed without her being asked to paint their faces anymore. Even when her landlord raised the rent, knowing she didn't have another place to go. Even when the pastor stopped asking her to read poems at memorials, she would say, "But kindness doesn't always earn kindness, and purity, in a world that values performance, can be mistaken for weakness." Still, she carried on. With her brushes, her music, her hands smelled faintly of lavender oil and charcoal pencil. She didn't fight the silence, she just made beauty inside it. Some evenings she would sit alone in her kitchen with a cup of lukewarm tea and trace steam trails with her fingertip, pretending they were maps to somewhere else. Not that she wanted to leave. She just wanted to be seen without being studied, to be asked how she was without the question being a courtesy, to be held, not out of obligation but desire. She never said these things out loud, not even to herself, but they gathered inside her, little silences stacked like unsent letters. Sometimes she walked to the orchard after dusk, the abandoned one behind the ridge, where wild mint grew near the roots and moths fluttered through broken fence posts. She would lie on the ground, look up at the sky, and whisper the names of stars to feel less alone. She didn't need attention. She just missed connection, and though she had mastered the art of gentle smiles and long sighs, a part of her was beginning to ache for something more. Not a rescue, not a fairy tale. Just a voice that didn't sound like the town. She had no idea that one was already on its way, strapped to the back of an old pickup, humming chords that would find her in the dark like they'd known her all along. He arrived on a Tuesday. No fanfare, no destination. Just dust on his boots and an old guitar case tied with fraying leather. The townsfolk noticed. Not because he made noise, but because he didn't. He asked for nothing, slept in the back of his truck parked near the diner. Worked odd jobs, cleaning out the old church attic, fixing a squeaky porch swing, tuning a neighbor's piano by ear. But what made people lean in was his voice. He played at the tavern on Fridays, no lights, no microphones, just him, a stool, and the way he sang like the words were stitched to something he'd lost. Low, slow, broken in all the right places. He didn't sing to be heard, he sang to feel, and people felt it. Even the bartender stopped wiping glasses when Cairo sang about love like it had teeth and memory like it had weight. Serafina sat in the far corner the first night she heard him. One song in, she forgot to sip her tea. By the second, she realized she was crying, not loudly, just a single tear on the rim of her cheek, no idea where it came from. She didn't speak to him that night. Didn't need to, she just watched. But the next week, when the tavern emptied and chairs scraped the floor, she was still there. He noticed. "Didn't expect an audience after the encore," he said, packing up. "I didn't expect a singer to make the room feel like a confession," she answered. And just like that, something between them shifted, not loudly, just enough to be felt. They didn't plan it, they just lingered. After the tavern lights dimmed and Cairo packed up his guitar, Serafina walked beside him, slow, unhurried, as if neither of them wanted the night to end. "I live a few streets down," she said softly. "The kettle's still warm if you're not in a rush." He hesitated, not out of suspicion, out of disbelief. Kindness felt foreign to him. It usually came with terms or warnings, but her offer wasn't heavy, just real. They sat on her porch, knees not touching, steam rising between mismatched mugs. "I've always liked jasmine," he said, sniffing the tea. "I always add too much honey," she smiled. "It's not too much." That was the first truth spoken between them. The second came an hour later, after a pause that felt like music waiting to be written. "My mama left when I was 9, Cairo said, his thumb rubbing the ceramic lip of the cup. "Didn't take a suitcase, just her earrings and the name she gave me." Serafina didn't say sorry. She just looked at him like she knew the ache behind that sentence. Because she did. "My mother died giving birth," she replied. "Sometimes I wonder if the guilt of being born chased everything else out of me." They sat like that for a while. No rush to fix each other, just room to breathe. The next week they met again, and again. Sometimes they said nothing at all, just sat by the oak tree, watching the wind carry leaves across the earth like secrets. He showed her an unfinished song. She showed him her sketchbook. "I don't think I belong anywhere," he said one night. "You belong here," she whispered, without looking up. He didn't respond, but he stayed. "I want to show you something," Cairo said one evening as they stood outside her door. Serafina glanced at the time. the sky still holding the last whisper of light. "I'll follow," she said. They walked without speaking, past the closed shops and sleepy windows, past the school where laughter once echoed, past the hill where summer always lingered a little longer. They arrived at the orchard, overgrown, half forgotten, but something in the air made it feel like it had been waiting just for them. Fireflies drifted between the trees, quiet sparks floating like breath made visible. The grass was high, the sky was open, and Cairo reached for her hand, not to pull, just to let her know she could hold on, if she needed to. She did. "Why here?" she asked. He looked around, like the answer was in the air. "My mother used to tell me the world doesn't owe us magic," he said, "but sometimes, if we stop searching and just stand still, it gives us some anyway." She smiled. What would she say about this place? That it's a prayer someone forgot to say out loud? They sat beneath one of the trees, knees touching this time. His guitar rested in the grass, unplayed. There was no need for music when hearts were already speaking in full sentences. He looked at her, long, open, unafraid, and said, "I feel like I've known you longer than time has kept count." She didn't blink, didn't laugh. She only whispered, "Then why do I feel like I'm still waiting for you?" The breeze paused. So did he. "I didn't know where to find home," he answered, "until your voice made everything else quiet." She looked away, almost shy, the kind of shy that happens when something inside you says, "Don't mess this up." But he didn't lean in. He stayed still. And because he didn't rush, she moved closer. The grass pressed beneath their legs. The orchard held its breath. Somewhere, an owl called out, distant, soft, as if nature itself knew to hush. Serafina reached out and brushed a curl behind Cairo's ear. He turned toward her but didn't touch. Not yet. She traced a scar near his collarbone with the back of her fingers. He flinched, not from pain, but from memory. "What happened here?" she asked. "My father," he replied. "He believed in rules more than love." She didn't ask anything else. She just leaned forward and kissed that scar like it was something sacred. "I'm tired of being careful," she whispered, "but not careless, just tired of pretending I don't want to feel something that's mine." He looked at her, eyes filled with something close to reverence. "I don't want to be anywhere else," he murmured. They didn't undress with urgency. There was no hunger in it, just quiet permission. Cairo kissed her shoulder, slow and open. His hands moved with caution, like every inch of her skin was asking to be remembered. Serafina ran her fingers through the space between his ribs, the place where breath trembles before confession. They didn't speak for a while. When they lay together, it wasn't about passion. It was about presence, no one asking them to be less. No fear of being too much. Just skin and soul, breathing in rhythm under the open sky. Fireflies circled like silent witnesses. Stars blinked, indifferent and eternal. And when he thought she'd fallen asleep, she said, "Even if you leave, I'll still remember you like this." He closed his eyes, voice caught in his throat. "I don't want to leave anything I finally found." Cairo never meant to leave. He only went to fill the truck with gas and grab an old guitar string from the shop. The orchard still smelled like her skin. Her goodbye kiss still lingered on his jaw. He was planning to come back before sunset, but fate had other plans. She was waiting for him by the gas pump. Hair swept neatly into a chignon. Gloves, real ones, in summer. Her voice like a choir leader, sweet and sharp. "You must be Cairo." He blinked. "Yes, I'm sorry. Do I know you?" A pause. Measured. She smiled like someone posing for a church bulletin. "You know of me. I raised you. When your father passed, I kept your name intact. I gave you shelter. And now I hear you're singing for scraps and keeping company with broken women." He stiffened. "You're," she nodded, still smiling, "the woman who spent her life protecting what your real mother left behind. And now I see you throwing it away for—" "Don't," he cut in. Her tone never changed. "They say she's expecting, that she's already planning to tie you down before you can even get your life together. Is that what you want? To build a future from guilt and scandal?" He tried to speak, but she kept going. Smooth, relentless, rehearsed. She's already moved on. That's what girls like her do. They get soft-eyed with one boy and look for another when he leaves the room. Cairo had heard lies before, but this wasn't loud. It was subtle, like a hand resting on his shoulder with just enough pressure to guide him away from everything he wanted. He sat in his truck after she left. The engine idled. He didn't drive, didn't cry. He just stared at the wheel, playing her words over and over, already planning to tie you down. She's moved on. Girls like her, it shouldn't have worked, but it did. What if she was expecting and scared to say so? What if he wasn't enough? The weight of his doubt made every memory feel like a mistake. By noon, she had tried to call him, twice. By 2 o'clock, the number she dialed went straight to voicemail. By dusk, his truck was gone. He didn't leave a note. Didn't stop by the orchard. Didn't hear the letter Serafina had been practicing in her head all day. She waited. She wore the same dress from the night they first kissed, as if memory had a uniform. Clutching an envelope that said everything her mouth was too soft to scream. It stayed sealed. So did she. Night stretched on. The orchard grew colder. And still, Serafina waited. She had folded and unfolded the letter so many times that the creases had turned white. Each word inside was inked with her trembling hand. Promises, fears, little pieces of her heart she had never said out loud. But the paper never left her fingers. It stayed pressed to her chest, as if holding it closer could somehow bring him back. Every set of footsteps she imagined in the distance belonged to him. Every gust of wind felt like it might carry his voice, but he never came. She finally rose, walked home barefoot, and placed the letter in a drawer she would never open again. In that moment, she didn't hate him. She didn't curse the silence. She only felt hollow, like a room stripped of its furniture. The orchard had given her love and stolen it just as quickly. If someone twisted the truth to keep you from the person you loved, would you believe them, or would you fight to hear your lover's voice before deciding? Subscribe right now if you've ever been hurt by lies, and tell me in the comments, what would you have done if you were Cairo? Trust the words of blood, or trust the heart that beat beside you? When the sickness came, Serafina thought it was grief. She woke with nausea curling beneath her ribs. Food lost its flavor. Sleep came in patches. Her body felt borrowed. And then her cycle didn't come, and then the test confirmed it. She told her aunt, the only family she had left, not with excitement, not with regret, just truth, because lies had already done enough damage. The response wasn't a gasp. It wasn't even a question. Her aunt reached across the table and slapped the cup of tea from Serafina's hand. The porcelain cracked against the floor. "You will not bring shame into this house," she said, not loudly, but with finality, like a door closing. Serafina left that same night, clutching a blanket and a half-used notebook. She thought about sleeping in the school's back shed, but the greenhouse behind it, long abandoned, half glass, half rot, at least had a bench she could lie on. No one saw her leave, or if they did, they looked away. The whispers came quickly. She did it to herself. She led that boy astray. She always was strange. Now we know why. Parents stopped bringing their children to the art garden she had once tended. The grocery clerk who used to sneak her fresh plums suddenly couldn't find her name in the charity register. The town that once accepted her silence now punished it. The greenhouse smelled of damp earth and dust. One side of the roof had collapsed years ago, letting wind curl through the beams like it had a right to be there. She swept out broken flower pots with her hands, cleared a spot on the bench, hung her coat over the jagged corner of a window to block the breeze. That became her home. By day, she tried to appear invisible, slipping into alleys behind the bakery, collecting half-spoiled fruit, digging through forgotten shelves behind the school kitchen. Cans with faded labels became dinner. Dry crackers on lucky nights. When her stomach twisted too tight to move, she hummed softly to her belly. At night, she wrapped her blanket tight and rested her hands on the small curve growing under her dress. She would talk to them, not with expectation, but with longing. She gave them names she never said aloud, drew little shapes in her notebook, 1 heart, then 2, then 3. She sang to them quietly under her breath, songs she used to hum to other people's babies when they cried in waiting rooms. Now she hummed for the ones who only knew the sound of her heartbeat. They kicked sometimes, one after the other, little nudges like, "We hear you." That was enough to keep her breathing. Never begged. She just endured, one night at a time, beneath cracked glass and judgment that had no face, only distance. By the 7th month, her legs ached just from standing. Her ankles swelled. Her breath grew short. Her coat no longer buttoned. She sat more than she walked. Some days, she stayed curled on the bench until nightfall, counting heartbeats to remind herself she was still here. No one visited. No one checked. They had all made their peace with her absence, as if she'd simply vanished, and it was easier to let the memory of her dissolve. But her body remembered. The pain started as a dull throb in her back, then tightened like a fist across her stomach. She tried to breathe through it. Maybe it was too early. Maybe it was nothing. But hours passed and the ache deepened. Her vision blurred. Her hands shook. She reached for the notebook beside her, tried to write something, anything, in case she didn't survive the night. "I'm sorry I couldn't give you more. I tried to love you before the world could lie to you." The pen slipped from her fingers. Another wave of pain. She doubled over, biting the edge of her blanket to keep from crying out. She was alone, utterly, fully, entirely alone. No midwife, no lights, just her breath, and the cracking rhythm of a body preparing to break itself open. She whispered one last thing into the shadows before the first tear slipped from her cheek. "If I go, let them live," but from exhaustion, not from surrender, but from carrying too much, for too long, with no hands reaching back. The sky dimmed by late afternoon, not gently, but like something had decided the light was no longer needed. The air thickened, clouds gathered like judgment, and the first drop fell through the broken pane above her head as Serafina clutched her stomach and slid from the bench onto the floor. Pain clawed through her, a grip that wouldn't let go. This wasn't the quiet ache from before. This was different, urgent, heavy, final. She gasped and grabbed the edge of the table, her fingers white from pressure. Another wave. Her legs buckled. She landed on her side with a grunt, forehead pressed to the cold concrete, whispering to herself between clenched teeth. "Not yet. I'm not ready, please." But it had already begun. Her body moved without permission, like the soul inside her had chosen this moment, and no amount of begging could slow it down. The wind pushed through the cracks now, harder, louder. Glass rattled. Leaves scattered across the floor. She tried to get back on the bench, failed. Instead, she curled in on herself, rocking, breathing, counting. Each contraction ripped through her like thunder under the skin. She gritted her teeth so hard she thought one might crack, but she didn't scream. Not yet. There was no one to hear it. Only the unborn waiting inside her, and whatever strength remained in the hollow space where love used to live. Hours passed. The sun disappeared behind a wall of gray, and the sky gave way. Wind shoved through every crack. Rain forced itself through the ceiling, dripping in uneven rhythms across her arms, her dress, her face. She lay flat now, her back against the wet floor, knees bent, fingers clutching the edge of her blanket with so much force her knuckles burned. She could feel them. One, then another, and still one more, pushing, pressing, waiting to emerge. The pain wasn't coming in waves anymore. It was a storm that never stopped. She screamed. Not from weakness, but because it was the only way her body could finish what it started. Her voice echoed off the glass like it had a purpose. Her breath caught as she bore down alone. No midwife, no soft hand, only grit and grief and life trying to break through. "Please," she whispered to no one. "Let them be okay." The first cry came suddenly, thin, urgent, alive. She reached with shaking arms, pulled the baby close, and wept. Then came the second, writhing and wet, limbs flailing as though it had fought its way through a world already hostile. She pulled that one to her chest, too, her arms trembling, her body fading. But the third didn't cry right away. She turned her face, blinking water from her eyes, barely able to move. "Please." And then it happened. A single broken wail, fragile and perfect. 3 children, 3 cries. One mother half-conscious, soaked in sweat and rain, her body torn and open, but her arms full of life. She collapsed beside them, chest rising slowly. Her lips moved one last time before sleep took her. "You made it." Morning crept in behind the storm, slow, gray, and damp. The streets were quiet, puddles collecting at the feet of benches and doorsteps. A boy named Eli, no older than 10, walked the shortcut to school through the back trail behind the community garden. His shoes splashed through wet leaves. His backpack thumped against his spine. He'd passed the greenhouse every morning. It had always looked abandoned, but this morning, something stopped him. A sound, repeating. He stepped closer, squinting through the shattered window. At first, he thought it was a bundle of coats. Then he saw movement, arms, tiny fists. Then, her, Serafina, lying on the floor, still as stone, surrounded by 3 newborns curled against her like petals clinging to the last bloom of summer. One baby wailed. Another hiccuped, eyes open, blinking at the gray sky above. The third pressed close to her chest, mouth open, seeking warmth. Eli didn't wait. He dropped his backpack and ran. Word spread fast, By the time the school bell rang, the town had gathered around the greenhouse like moths to a light they once swore was burned out. She didn't move when they entered. Her skin was pale, her lips barely parted, but the babies were breathing. So was she. No one spoke. Not the mayor, not the pastor, not the clerk who once turned her away in line. They just stood there, watching, ashamed, because it wasn't thunder that shook them. It was the sound of life, crying, breathing, demanding to be held, wrapped in the arms of a woman they had tried to forget. In that moment, Serafina didn't scream for help. She screamed for survival. If this moment shook your soul, please subscribe and drop a comment. What do you think the town felt when they saw her like that? Guilt? Regret? Respect? I'll be reading every single one. The photo reached him by accident. It had been weeks since he left Willowbrook. A different city, new streets, old pain. Cairo played in quiet corners, slept in borrowed rooms, kept his heart behind locked ribs. One afternoon, a stranger, someone from the tavern, showed him a post someone had shared. A blurry image, a caption that said nothing. But the picture said everything. Serafina, wrapped in a towel, holding 3 newborns against her chest, exhausted, pale, glowing in a way that broke something in him. He stared at the screen, frozen, eyes burning. The first baby had his jawline, the second his eyes, the third, a small shadow of his nose, even in sleep. He didn't speak. He stood, took one step onto the sidewalk, and his legs gave out. He dropped to his knees in the middle of the street, breath stolen, hands shaking. A stranger had to help him up. He didn't ask for directions, didn't pack much, he just left. The road back was quiet. Every exit sign reminded him of what he threw away. He didn't rehearse a speech. He didn't plan a gesture. He only thought one thing: don't ask to be let in. Just prove you still know how to stay. He arrived at the edge of town just before sundown. Didn't stop at the diner. Didn't call anyone. He walked straight to the greenhouse, the one behind the school, the place no one thought twice about. Until now. He stood outside, breath catching, heart trembling, and waited, not for forgiveness, just for the chance to begin again, without saying a single word. The first morning, he left a loaf of bread and a bag of oranges at the greenhouse door. He didn't wait to be seen, just placed them down and walked away. The next day, a box of diapers, then blankets, then fresh nails, a hammer, and a folded note with no words, just a drawing of a small roof with a sun above it. Serafina said nothing. She watched through the glass with her babies on her lap, unsure whether to scream or sob, but she did neither. He returned each evening, never entered, just worked. He began with the corner panel, replacing the broken panes with old window glass he salvaged, then patched the roof, then swept the floor slowly like it mattered. He didn't knock, didn't ask for entry, only waited for the sun to dip, then sat outside, guitar in hand, and hummed lullabies she hadn't heard since the tavern. The babies would lift their heads, crawl to the wall. One of them tapped the glass with their tiny fist when they heard his voice. Cairo looked up, smiled, but didn't move closer. Inside, Serafina's chest tightened. She wanted to tell him to leave, to tell him it was too late. But when she opened her mouth, only silence came out, and her arms wrapped tighter around the children instead. He didn't press, he didn't speak. He just sang to the evening air, every note a kind of apology that words couldn't carry. Day after day. No reward, no guarantee, just presence. It started small. One evening, as Cairo finished sweeping the path outside the greenhouse, one of the babies crawled toward the door. Not with urgency, just curiosity. The glass was cleaner now. Light came through again, and on the other side of it, his voice hummed something soft and slow. The baby pressed a hand to the pane. Then another. The others followed. Serafina stood behind them, arms crossed. Not angry, just uncertain, her face unreadable, her heart not so much. Cairo looked up, met her gaze through the glass. This time, he didn't look away. He stood, walked a few steps back. Then slowly, he knelt. No smile, no plea, just stillness, showing he wasn't there to take but to earn. The babies began to babble. One of them giggled, the soft, bubbling kind that only came when the world felt safe. But she stepped forward, unlatched the door, left it half open, didn't invite him in, didn't ask him to sit, just left it open, and that was enough. The next day she handed him a bowl of stew. No words, just a nod. The day after, she joined him outside, sat a few feet away while the babies napped inside. No talking, just wind. and the sound of someone building something, quietly, piece by piece. He didn't show up with flowers. He showed up with tools. Subscribe if you believe love is about showing up, not just saying sorry. And tell me in the comments, do you think he deserved a second chance? Be honest. I want to hear what you would have done. The greenhouse was still standing, not flawless, not polished, but warmer now, stronger. The roof didn't leak anymore. The door creaked less. And in the back corner, where vines once crept through the cracks, Cairo had built a bookshelf, stacked with children's books and old poetry. Some mornings, Serafina stood barefoot in the doorway, holding a cup of tea, watching her children chase each other beneath the oak tree. Their laughter wasn't loud, but it filled the space, no longer to perform, just to be present. He read to them now, not from worn lyrics scribbled in journals, but from books with torn covers and bent pages. Fairy tales, fables, and sometimes poetry. One afternoon, he gathered the 3 toddlers under the tree and opened a notebook Serafina once left on the porch. It was filled with verses she never meant to share, drawings of birds, soft lines about longing, belonging, becoming. He read them gently, not skipping a single word. People walking past paused without meaning to. An older woman with groceries stopped just outside the fence. They didn't stare. They watched. And for once, they didn't look away out of judgment. They looked on, because something real was unfolding, and they knew they didn't deserve to interrupt it. It didn't happen all at once. But change rarely does. The clerk at the grocery store, the one who once pretended Serafina didn't exist, started slipping extra fruit into her bag, not to be seen, just to make a quiet return. The pastor, who never visited, sent over a stack of gently worn children's clothes with no note attached, and the same parents who once whispered her name with disgust began nodding when they passed her on the street. Not out of pity, out of something closer to respect. They watched as Cairo repaired the swings behind the school, the ones their kids used every day. They saw Serafina kneel in the dirt, planting new seeds in the church garden without asking for permission. They noticed the way the children were loved, not loudly, but thoroughly. One day, Cairo stood in the park, guitar slung over his back, while the children played. A small group of teenagers sat nearby. One of them asked if he still sang. He smiled, nodded once, and strummed a soft tune. No performance, no show, just melody, like breath with a rhythm. A few minutes later, more people gathered. No one talked. They just listened. Not to a man reclaiming a reputation, but to a man who had nothing to prove, and yet everything to give. That was the day the town's silence changed, not with applause, but with presence. They didn't say sorry. They didn't admit they were wrong, but they stayed. And sometimes, staying is the loudest confession of all. The oak tree behind the school had seen everything. Serafina sitting alone with poetry and paint under its limbs. Cairo walking past it, guitar on his back, unsure of where he belonged. Now it watched 3 toddlers run circles in the grass while their mother packed snacks into small containers and their father fixed the broken latch on a garden gate. It wasn't perfect. Nothing about them was. Sometimes Cairo forgot the formula. Sometimes Serafina cried when no one else was awake. There were arguments about nothing and about things that mattered. There were days the kids screamed, and no one knew why. But love isn't measured by harmony. And Cairo returned, every single day, with hands that built, with a voice that softened, with eyes that said, "You are not invisible anymore." One afternoon, a poetry reading was held at the park, a small community event with folding chairs and free lemonade. The organizer hesitated when she saw Serafina, then surprisingly asked if she'd like to close the evening with something of her own. Serafina nodded. She stood in front of the small group, not with confidence but with calm, and read a poem she once wrote while sitting in the greenhouse. The final line, "They didn't save me, but they made me worth staying for." She didn't cry, but 3 others in the crowd did. No one gossiped after that, not because they were told to stop, but because there was nothing left to say. When you see a man kiss the scarred hands of the woman who raised his children alone, when you hear a child laugh where a woman once bled in silence, you don't criticize. You listen, you nod, you learn. There are stories that entertain, and there are stories that remind. This one, it reminds us that silence can scream, that exile can birth strength, that not all rescue looks like someone showing up with a cape. Sometimes it looks like a woman surviving when no one expected her to. Serafina was never the town's villain, but she was treated like one. Why? Because she didn't live by their expectations. because she dared to feel deeply, because she trusted love and it left her waiting under the stars. And yet, when the world turned cold, she didn't scream for pity. She built a cradle out of nothing. She sang lullabies to empty wind. She held 3 lives in her arms while her own heart bled in silence. She did what they said she couldn't, what they said she shouldn't. She kept going. And when Cairo returned, not with speeches but with action, not with flowers but with presence, it didn't undo the past, but it began something new. Because love isn't noise, it's effort. It's showing up. It's fixing the broken latch without needing to be asked. It's learning the lullaby she once hummed and playing it back, years later, softly, outside the window. They weren't perfect, but they were real, and real always outlives gossip. The same mouths that called her shameful now whisper her name with a kind of awe. Because truth always survives judgment, and the things built with quiet hands, they last longer than the things shouted from pulpits and porches. So the next time someone tells you your story is over, or that you're too broken to be believed, remember Serafina, and remember this: you don't need saving, you just need to survive long enough for truth to catch up to you. Serafina never needed saving. She just needed to survive until truth found her. If this story touched you, subscribe right now so we can keep telling stories that matter. And let's flood this comment section with one word: strength. To honor every Serafina the world tried to break, but couldn't.